Hello, and welcome to the Payments.com digital discussion on something we're calling transaction abandonment. I'm Karen Webster. First, let's put a little context around our topic today. We're approaching the most wonderful time of the year, the holiday season, when retailers look to make up for lost spend and when increasingly shoppers go online to make their purchases, now increasingly with their mobile devices. More than 75% of adults in the U.S., for example, plan to go online to buy gifts, and if they're anything like me, they'll also fill their virtual carts with stuff for themselves, too. So the environment for retailers now and in the future is to provide a simple and secure shopping experience, and that has never been more important. Unfortunately, getting it right has never been more complicated. The sophistication of the cyber criminal is coming at the same time the consumer's love affair with mobile devices and using them to shop has never been more intense. Retailers have only one chance to get it right, since getting it wrong may mean the loss of a customer for life. Getting it wrong, of course, is because and comes in the form of a variety of flavors, most often described as a poor user experience. A poor user experience can range from a website that's just too hard to navigate or accepts only a small number of payments types, or to perhaps the most egregious form, from the consumer's point of view anyway, being declined when they shouldn't be. Regardless, the result of all of this is abandoned transactions, $4 trillion worth collectively last year. Now, retailers have an ally to help them recapture some of what would otherwise be lost, and it doesn't necessarily have to come in the form of a knight in shining armor. But the issuer, who today has new tools to help improve the user experience and in the process return some of that lost $4 trillion to their bottom lines. Here today to walk us through all of this is Nick Craig, VP of Sales for CA Technologies. Nick, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't we get right into it, since we do have a lot to cover. I will mention that for those who are listening, please feel free to ask questions throughout. As I see questions come through, I will let Nick know, and we'll get them going. So, Nick, it's all yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen, and thank you for such a wonderful context and introduction. I couldn't have put it better myself. So we're going to be touching today on a number of things related to this subject of cardholder experience, and specifically the concept of fraud and how fraud impacts that cardholder journey. And as Karen said, that we're at a stage now where we're facing very high levels of e-commerce shopping, and certainly this year and this peak shopping season that we're just about to approach is no doubt going to break records as we've seen that trend continue over the last few years. So we're going to be touching on that, and we're going to be touching on really the landscape today and why the issuer is becoming such an important part of the journey in being able to address some of the challenges that Karen has identified. So starting off with that, let's just spend a little bit of time talking about the landscape itself. So we have seen in recent times a significant shift occurring, a shift in terms of the type of transactions that we're seeing online. And in front of you here is a slide that tries to highlight that shift in quite significant terms. And you'll see that the volume of card transactions online and the volume of alternative payments is significantly shifting. So what does that mean, and why is that important? Well, there are a couple of things here that I think are worthwhile spending a moment thinking about. The first is that when these methods of payment start to change, there is a bank at the end of each of those payments trying to approve or decline those transactions, and they've got a very difficult task in front of them. Karen outlined that in declining a transaction, you could be losing not just the transaction itself, but you could also be losing the customer's loyalty. You could be losing the front of wallet status of the payment method. So the type of transactions that are being seen, the volume that is likely to increase over the next period of time is going to see quite a significant change in the strategies that the banks employ. And certainly when we think about EMV and the changes that are happening within certainly the US right now, with the October being the liability shift date for a number of EMV transactions, the shift to online fraud is certainly something that is going to represent much more of a challenge for issuers to manage. Some statistics there recently from Javelin suggest that 42% of the false positive declines are due to online shopping. So that itself indicates that the online channel represents a much higher proportion of the total false positives that are seen in the markets today. That maybe represents in the region, estimated by Javelin, of about $7 to $8 billion of revenue in false positives. So that's quite a significant problem to be dealing with, and quite also a significant opportunity. Add to that the new methods of payment that we're starting to see today. I think today represents the anniversary of Apple Pay's one-year anniversary, and certainly the experience that banks have seen with those new methods of payment, which traditionally have been based on this concept of trust between the merchant and the payment provider, is starting to add a different level of complexity when we start thinking and looking at the fraud that is seen on some of those new methods of alternative payment. So as an issuer, what choice do you have? You can approve the transaction and take the risk associated with that, or you can decline the transaction and risk that the cardholder becomes less loyal to you. So this is a very delicate balance, and what we're going to talk about today in a bit more detail is the challenge associated with that and the opportunity that banks have in being able to close that gap.
You know, Nick, it's amazing to me to look at the chart on the upper left there with the increase in the alternative, the number of alternative payments. And I think part of that is on a mobile device, consumers are looking for, you know, the buy button that makes it easy for them to transact online in some cases. And in other cases, obviously, they're coming from outside of a domestic market, shopping on a site where they want to be able to use their preferred payment type. Either way, you know, the increase in alternative payment use is really stark here, and I think it's a significant trend that you rightly point out as a real area to focus on and a contributor to some of the problems you outlined.
Absolutely. I think you're right to point out the mobile element to that. Mobile is growing at a rate of knots and certainly represents a different sort of risk model than we have seen in other methods of payment and other payment types. But there's no doubt that the world that we are going to be facing in the next few years is going to become a lot more competitive than it even is today. So even the 57% of transactions coming from alternative payments, when you look at the bottom half of the chart and the volume that is being seen, you can almost see a doubling of the card transactions in just a couple of years, and that is quite a significant shift. So, so there are both challenges and also opportunities. But certainly, you're right to point out the mobile element to that. So let's just expand that a little bit further. There is a lot of talk and a lot of discussion about shopping cart abandonment, and quite often, you know, that gets a lot of attention, and certainly for merchants is going to be the thing to be looking at. Behind all of those transactions and behind all of those lost transactions is an issuing bank. And what's interesting is the dynamic of the revenue loss for that issuing bank. It is equally important, if not as important or more important, in terms of the lost transaction for the issuer, the pain and the lost opportunity for the issuing bank. So spending a moment just to outline that, I think, is useful in the context of recognizing that the issuing bank is equally in the same position as the merchant when thinking about the importance of declining transactions, the fraud balance, and being able to capitalize on the opportunity. Fundamentally, there are three things that happen with banks when thinking about the transaction itself. The most important, of course, is the transaction itself. The lost interchange generates an element of revenue. What also is important, and probably as important as that, is the subsequent revenue that banks get from net interest income, and that can be very significant. So for every transaction, obviously bearing on interchange rates around the world, that may cost, from a transaction standpoint, somewhere in the region of $3 or $4 over just a few years. So it's a significant amount of revenue that's associated with that. You've also got to recognize the impact of fraud and the net loss on fraud, but on top of that, there's an operational impact. The volume of transactions, wherever there is a decline that's made or wherever there is an abandonment, if it's a payment system issue, then the first point of call is going to be the bank itself. And so the volume of transactions or volume calls that come into banks' call centers, they can be very costly for a bank to manage. So optimizing this is not just great for the merchants, but it is fantastic for the issuers as well. So there's a huge opportunity here, and also a huge challenge in getting that balance right.
No, I think you make a good point. Your middle column, the customer loyalty, is interesting because I think as a consumer shopping online, if the experience is clunky, you blame the merchant. Oh, they have a lousy site. But if the decline happens when you've gone through the pain of filling your shopping cart, the issuer is who gets blamed, not the merchant. So I think that's a really important point.
And that is quite often misunderstood as well. So we talk about declines for fraud. There may be declines for the reasons outside of that. Is the account, has the account got funds in, etc. Mm-hmm. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well. But the customer loyalty absolutely is central to the banks. Yep. Being able to encourage that reuse is very important. Okay, so let's just dig down a little bit further then into the area of fraud. It is very easy to operate a system that is highly effective with highest levels of acceptance. You just approve every single transaction that you see. The consequence of that is obviously the fraud itself. And again, it's very easy to stop the fraud. You just stop every transaction that you see, but no one's going to earn any money by doing that. So the challenge, of course, is how to understand better the fraud landscape. So just spending a moment on that is quite important. So what we have here in front of us is a study that our data science team have recently completed. And this is looking at cardholder behavior globally. And what's important here is that we all know that transactions happen around the world to different merchants, and the internet is a global place. What is more interesting is looking at where cardholders shop online. And it is very easy as a bank to understand which merchants are being shopped at, but it's much more difficult for the bank to really identify where the cardholder is, and that can obviously make a big difference. And in doing that, what this study attempts to look at is where a cardholder is shopping in a foreign country. And there are millions of these transactions going on every day. And you can see the scale of the colors from very dark green, which is these are genuine transactions that are happening, and each of those are from foreign cardholders. So if the card is issued in the U.S., then none of those transactions would count in this graph here. And you can see the hotspots around the world. So it's important to sort of understand what the genuine cardholder experience really is, and the visibility that location has, and the impact that location has to that position. If we then just flip to what we are seeing from a fraudulent standpoint, you can see that map is very different, and the rates of fraud is also very different. And what is stark is just the range of fraud that is happening from an online standpoint. We are very used to, certainly the banks are very used to, a certain rate of fraud. If you think about authorization systems, they may be seeing fraud in a traditional point of sale in the region of maybe 5 basis points to 20 basis points. In this example, and the study that's been completed, you can see that there are some parts of the world, some locations where the transaction is being performed from, where you have up to 1,000 basis points of fraud, and that is hugely risky, and clearly is a huge challenge and a huge risk. So understanding the dynamic of the transactions that are coming through and where those transactions are originating from has a huge impact to that. It's also worth noting that the bank themselves, through the authorization systems that they are using, they don't have visibility of the data that we're talking about here. The type of data here on geolocation, on the type of device that's being used, on the connection speed that's being used, they are very good indicators of fraudulent activity. And it's that data that in the normal authorization stream just isn't available. So identifying that type of data is a huge opportunity, and certainly we'll go on to talk about how we do that and what impact that can have to this experience. So as we just move on from that, what I'm showing here is an example of how that changes, and I think the chart itself should be moving, but I think we have a technical problem here. But ultimately, what we're saying here is that the fraud rates will change very drastically across the world. So every day, every hour, those fraud rates and those hotspots will jump and will move quite significantly. And what that means is that really, in order to be very sophisticated in pinpointing both genuine cardholder behavior as well as suspicious activity, we really need to take a very sophisticated approach from the analytics standpoint. That's the only way that we are going to be able to identify the genuine cardholders as well as the fraudulent activity. And when we start to think back to the original, one of the first few slides that we touched on, the volume of transactions that we're seeing on e-commerce is going to jump rapidly. So the manual intervention and the brute force type of declines is a strategy that is unlikely to be something that will be effective if we think about the next few years and what's going to happen with both the fraud rates as well as the EMV shift and the cardholder experience.
So Nick, a question. I mean, is part of the story, though, there are just more people online buying, and therefore the opportunity for fraud is just greater? I mean, I know that we have sophisticated cyber criminals that can operate in ways that they couldn't perhaps easily operate before, and they're more organized. But, I mean, part of the story is just there's so much more volume.
Yeah, there is so much more volume, but it's a combination of volume and the difficulty in being able to identify what is a genuine transaction versus what is a suspicious transaction. When you think about card-present transactions, you have the opportunity to verify identity using a variety of different methods, right? The recent chip card deployment in the U.S. is a good example of that. When you're shopping online, that opportunity is much more limited. So you can certainly identify, and typically card issuing banks will identify using some static credentials, right? What's the CVV on the back of the card? What's the date of birth? What's the mother's maiden name? That type of information. And of course, we all know how effective that information is. It is not very effective. So it's the combination of those two things, how difficult it is to identify whether or not the person at the end of the device is actually the genuine cardholder, how much more difficult that is on the online channel versus in point of sale. And secondly, the volume. Because if the existing traditional systems that banks have been used to are only effective to a certain degree when thinking about online transactions, as that volume starts to increase, as the transactions migrate from card present to card not present, that becomes a completely different type of challenge for the issuing banks to manage. So really, in answer to your question, it's the combination of both of those two things that represents the biggest challenge, I think, for issuers in the years to come.
So authenticating identity is critical. It is the thing to be thinking about.
It is the ball game. Absolutely. So with that said,
I was going to say, it sounds like you're going to tell us how to play the game now.
You wouldn't expect me to do anything else, would you?
Not at all.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just spend a bit of time talking about how issuers are managing that, and I'm going to do that in the context of this thing called 3D Secure. Now, some may ask, why would I spend any time talking about 3D Secure when the subject of the conversation is about how do we improve cardholder experience? Certainly 3D Secure, verified by Visa, Secure Code, and other variants of the 3D Secure process have a name associated with them, with high abandonment rates and maybe higher failure rates and that sort of thing. So I'm going to attempt to lift the hood on that and give people a perspective of that, that the issuing banks are rapidly understanding that this is something that can really help in the process of both identifying fraud as well as making that transaction journey as good as possible to maximize the acceptance. So in doing that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the two things really that 3D Secure brings. The first thing that is very important, and we've been talking a little bit about that, is the data side of the equation. 3D Secure is known for passwords, static passwords, resetting, registration, etc., etc. But behind all of that is the opportunity that the issuer has to really get in front of the merchant and have a direct dialogue with the cardholder at the point of sale. And that is currently being used, or has historically been used, to present a password. But in that process, there is the opportunity to collect and generate digital data that the banks don't have access to in their normal authorization stream. That authorization stream hasn't changed in 20 years. And what 3D Secure brings is the opportunity to collect that data silently, to identify the connection speed, to identify the type of device, to identify the location that that cardholder is shopping from. These are hugely valuable pieces of data and information, which, if used properly and if used in sophisticated terms, can make a very big difference to the cardholder journey and experience. The second thing is the real-time authentication, that opportunity to have a direct dialogue with the cardholder at the point of sale. Most people think of that in terms of the static password, but there are a huge range of different options that are emerging for verifying identity. One-time passwords being sent to users' mobile phones via email or indeed over the voice network is just one example of that. We've recently done a project with a company in the Netherlands, ICS, around biometrics. These are new forms of authentication that are emerging that make it really easy for cardholders to verify their identity. But you don't have to do that on every single transaction. That's something that can be done selectively using the analytics and using the sophistication that sits behind that. So if, as an issuer, you can optimize the balance, if you can leverage the data that is being collected via this channel, and if you can use the real-time authentication dialogue to use a form of authentication that is really convenient whilst also being strong, that provides a significant opportunity to change the game, to identify the cardholder is the genuine cardholder, and to really identify those very suspicious high-risk transactions.
So Nick, I have a couple questions, and you mentioned biometrics. So if I'm using my mobile device has, Touch ID, and that is authenticating that I'm able to use my device and then, do whatever I want on my device, including shopping. How does that relate to the 3D Secure protocol? Does that supersede it, or does it work with it?
Really good question. So let's take, for example, the Apple Pay. Apple Pay is something that has proven to be very attractive for cardholders to jump on and to take advantage of. And using the device itself and the relationship between the device and Apple iTunes and other things, you can be assured of the person that's unlocking the phone can perform the transaction. But actually, it's the connection between the device and also the card instrument itself. And it's that connection, that point at which you say you're going to load a card onto a device. That's the point at which the process starts to break down. And certainly the high fraud rates that have been in the press for these methods of payment have been associated with that provisioning process in creating the connection between the card and the device itself. It is almost like thinking about a really strong lock on a front door. If you've got the most expensive lock on the front door, but you leave the key on the doorstep, then it's very easy for the fraudster to unlock this very sophisticated lock and walk through the door. It's that process that becomes very important, and if you strengthen that process through using these identity methods, then like biometrics, then you can make a bigger difference to that problem.
Got it. So it's the account takeover problem that you point out, that the Touch ID and the biometric unlocking of the phone doesn't solve. I would imagine that your answer is the same for the alternative payment types that are basically standing between the consumer and the underlying payment method that's attached to it. It's the same sort of thing. They need to be thinking about that relationship between the account that's provisioned in that e-wallet and protecting against a fraudulent event for the same reasons.
Absolutely, and if you think about the volume and the range of different methods of alternative payment, and you think about those alternative methods of payment, they're trying to make it as easy as possible for the cardholder to make that first transaction using their payment method. The risk that is likely to occur in the next couple of years with these new methods of payment is that if those payment methods aren't protected properly, because you make it so easy for cardholders or for consumers to use at the first time, then that becomes a challenge, and that challenge is going to fall very squarely at the foot of the issuing bank, and that's where I think things will evolve in an interesting direction over the next couple of years.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So, as I mentioned previously, when we're talking about the cardholder journey, there's a decision point that the issuer has. And historically, with 3D Secure, that decision point has been, we're going to present a static password because it's easy for us to manage that. And that decision point has also been, we're going to challenge every single transaction. We're going to treat a transaction of $1,000 in the same way that we would treat a transaction of $4. We're going to treat a cardholder who shops 20 times a day the same way that a cardholder shopping for the first time is treated. And so the question is, what is that balance? Where is the balance right to draw the line? Which transactions are worth challenging and which transactions are worth just allowing through? So the economics associated with that is actually quite important. And when we think about those economics, the underpinning of that is associated with the fraud rate that we're trying to prevent. And our data science team did a piece of work to try to calculate what that optimum balance or what the balance should be for that type of challenge rate. And the conclusion was that if you are challenging more than 37% of transactions, then you are likely to be losing more money through the lost income associated with transactions, the lost in net interest income associated with those lost transactions, than it would be for accepting the fraud loss and continuing and getting out of the way of the cardholder. So you can see why historically 3D Secure, verified by Visa secure code, has been seen by merchants as something that really gets in the way, because it's operating in the far right-hand corner of this graph, where you're challenging every single transaction, and you're creating friction, and not really solving the problem of fraud either with the method of authentication that is being used. So the optimum balance is obviously trying to minimize that challenge rate. But if you are challenging more than 37%, then you're most definitely going to be losing more money, obviously depending on the rate of fraud that is seen. So I think it's quite interesting to understand what the economics are behind this decision that issuers are trying to make.
So Nick, what is the benchmark? I mean, is there such a thing for thinking about challenging transactions? I mean, you say more than 30%, but what's the benchmark?
So when you think about e-commerce transactions, it's worth noting that this decision is going to be different depending on the part of the world that you are in, depending on the fraud rate that's associated with the region, and that fraud rate does vary quite significantly, and as we've seen previously, can be as high as 1,000 basis points of fraud. So obviously, if you've got 1,000 basis points of fraud, you're going to take a very different approach to if you've only got 1 or 2 basis points of fraud. So it does vary in that respect. Best in class would be challenging just a few % of the transactions, and really getting it out of the way for the majority of the transactions that are seen. But having the control of the rate of the challenge, and not treating every customer in the same way, and certainly not treating every portfolio in the same way, is very important.
You know, what's interesting, I think about the analogy with traveling these days, and going through the process of enrolling as a TSA pre-check or global entry, where you go through a process, they do background checks, they make sure you're okay, and then they give you basically a pass to expedite travel through airports. Seems like that's what we need for shopping online, the equivalent of the TSA pre-check or global entry, where the good guys that have perhaps gone through a process can zip through more quickly.
Absolutely. And if you can collect a whole pile of information before you even arrive at the airport in a silent manner, then you're able to automatically give cardholders that pre-check and guide them through the fastest lane possible. That's really what we're talking about, the opportunity that represents itself for issuing banks using 3D Secure much more effectively. It's a great analogy.
Interesting.
So as we talk about some of the benefits of this type of approach, worthwhile just spending just a moment talking about the journey or the flow. And here in front of us is really the three types of flows that are associated with what we are commonly referring to as risk-based authentication. That is to say, based on the risk of the transaction, we're going to alter the journey that we take cardholders through. In the case where the number of the risk is very low, then the process would be just get out of the cardholder's way, let the transaction go through, authenticate it using the techniques of analytics, and move on. And that's the first column that we see in front of us. The second column really then is taking cardholders through a journey of authentication, and that's really reserved for the higher risk transactions. That may be 5%, that may be 10%, that may be a few percent, that dependent on what you're trying to achieve as an issuing bank. And here you would be choosing the method of authentication, the method of identity that is most convenient for the cardholder. And it's important to note that not one size will fit every single cardholder. We will come in different shapes and sizes. What is convenient for me is going to be very different to other people. So that challenge is an important decision point for the issuing banks in managing the identity. And then the third type of transaction would be those transactions that are so obviously fraud that they stand out like a sore thumb, and that it's not even worth challenging with any form of identity, because you know that it is a fraudulent transaction. So you want to stop it in its tracks. You don't want to let that transaction go through authorization and risk being accepted. You want to be able to stop that transaction. So these are the flows that are associated with the latest form of 3D Secure, risk-based authentication. And this is something that provides a very effective tool for issuers to be able to manage those declines and minimize the number of declines that they make by making more effective decisions, getting out of the way of the cardholder, and only choosing to challenge those cardholders in a very small number of transactions using a very convenient method of authentication.
You know, I think one of the things that in the old days of how 3D Secure was deployed was it came up at the end, and it almost wasn't clear to the consumer that it was a legitimate ask. And, you know, people are very attuned to spoofing and things that just appear to be not typical of the checkout experience. So, even presenting something that has different branding around, secure code or verified by Visa, consumers just aren't used to seeing it. Therefore, I'm just curious about what you hear from issuers who talk to consumers about this. Does it give them pause? Like the 9.5% of transactions, I mean, presumably some of them are legitimate. Do people opt out at that point?
There are actually two differing opinions here. The first is the opinion that you've just described, which is cardholders are used to a certain thing, and when something new appears, they will perhaps pause. That's all about education, and certainly as cardholders become more educated and used to seeing certain things, and the communication that the issuing bank provides to cardholders about how they will be protected when they shop online is very important. So this is not something that you spring onto a cardholder. The other side of the equation is that there are parts of the world that actually mandate that every single online transaction needs to be strongly authenticated. And certainly if you look at what's happening with in Europe, that is heading in a certain direction. But sitting here in India right now, it is one part of the world where they have made that decision, the regulatory body, to mandate that the transactions should be authenticated on every single transaction. And the rationale behind that clearly is about giving cardholders a surety on the transaction itself, so that they are more confident in spending online, especially when they're spending increasingly large volumes of money online. Being able to protect that is very important. So two different perspectives there to that question, Karen.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, and you're right. I mean, in some parts of the world, this is not an option. But I think to this, think back to the spoofing emails that I get daily. They're getting very good. I mean, they look so legitimate that consumers are just, I think, at least in this country, increasingly alert to things that look legitimate and may kind of come out of nowhere in a process designed to protect them. You're right, education is key, but just curious as to whether that's come up in any conversations and how you're going to address that.
Yeah, that is certainly something that when we speak to issuers, we're talking about providing the best possible consistency of that journey. And when we think about historically the e-commerce channel being treated slightly differently to some of the other channels that the bank engage with, that idea of omni-channel that is such a buzzword at the moment is so important. Not just for cardholder and customer convenience, but also for the very point that you're outlining. If you're used to receiving a one-time password from the bank on your mobile phone, and you're able to select which mobile phone you send that through to, and you do that for e-commerce, you do that for online banking, and you do that for maybe even telephone banking, that is a consistent journey, and you are used to that journey with that bank, with that payment method. So it's much more difficult to replicate that type of consistent journey when thinking about the phishing, farming type of attacks that you're talking about.
Yep. No, I agree. Good point. I'm conscious of the time, Nick, so I'll try to stop asking questions and let you get through the next couple of slides.
Sure. So I'm going to your prompter pick up the pace a little bit. So I think we've touched most broadly on some of the benefits of this zero-touch, low-touch authentication approach using analytics. I'm going to skip past this, and I'm going to spend a bit more time talking about the examples that really highlight the benefits associated with the slide that we have in front of us. So here is an example of a bank that moved from a traditional approach for challenging transactions on every occasion to this risk-based approach, and you can see the significant difference that has in the nature of the cardholder journey. An 80% reduction in abandonment almost overnight as they move to this type of solution. Also reducing the number of failed transactions, cutting that in half, and having much higher levels of acceptance. But more importantly, that is achieved without any impact in the fraud rates that are seen, and that is almost counterintuitive. How can you challenge less in terms of the number of transactions, reduce the abandonment rate, whilst at the same time not have any impact to the fraud? And in some cases, you can actually reduce the amount of fraud by using the analytics that we have been talking about. So these are very real examples, and these are examples of where you can have an almost instantaneous impact to the problem that we've been talking about. If I move on then to give another example, this is an example of a bank that has really taken that to the next level, which is to say we're so keen to make sure that we get out of the way of the cardholder in terms of that cardholder journey that we're not going to use any method of authentication at all other than using analytics. And in this example, what was seen is a very stark difference in the transaction rates that were seen when compared to other traditional portfolios that perhaps are challenging every single transaction. And here you can see that the shopping frequency was maybe twice that of a portfolio that was challenging every single time. And the average value of the transaction, the average shopping basket, was 1.8 times. Now, of course, some of that is related to the nature of the portfolio that is being used. You can't compare apples with apples, but this has a very significant impact to the overall nature of the cardholder experience. And if you can find a way to make it easy for cardholders to shop online, they are more likely to use that payment method again and again and again. So this is a very real opportunity for us.
It's compelling. It's a compelling story.
So just to start to wrap up, and we're in the closing slides now. Spending some time thinking about the summary of what we've been talking about, issuers are facing that challenge, and that challenge being increasing fraud rates, increasing volume of transactions, and really the visibility that is a limited view at an authorization level. Being able to use 3D Secure far more intelligently in a risk-based approach represents quite a significant opportunity for issuing banks to optimize that process, whilst at the same time using strong methods of authentication and having the opportunity to verify those higher-risk transactions using a method of authentication that is very convenient and easy for the cardholder to use, at the same time as being very consistent across both the channels and the payment types that are being used. So in best-in-class, what we are starting to see globally is banks starting to develop both an authorization strategy from a fraud perspective as well as an authentication strategy. And that's something that the customers that we are working with are deploying very, very effectively.
So Nick, just a quick question on this, and this is thinking about the portfolio of things that issuers need to be thinking about with respect to fraud management and securing the environment for transactions. Is this the thing, or is this in combination with other things that are done?
So there's never a single answer to the problem, is there? And every issuer, every merchant is going to want to take a layered approach, and that layered approach provides a range of different protections for the issuer. So the combination of the authentication strategy and the authorization strategy is a good example of that type of layered approach. The ability to use both the analytics itself as well as the authentication method provides the best of both worlds from the standpoint of the layered-based approach that you have. And the type of authorization systems that are out there and the authentication opportunity that you have is really what best-in-class layered-based strategies are about.
Yeah, no, it's just, I mean, it's such a complicated area, and the layering is what I think everyone intuitively understands. It's just very hard to know how many layers and what those layers really need to include, and I think that's the challenge. It's helping the ecosystem sort it out. Who needs to do what in order to keep things secure, and the consumer with the confidence to not only transact but also to do it in a way that doesn't impose constraints on them. So I think it's a tough situation because there are just so many different people who are coming at this in very different ways.
Yes, it's an ecosystem that is going to become more complex also, when we think about those different methods of alternative payment and how different those methods of alternative payment are. That has a different risk register for the type of transaction, the type of risk that's seen. So I think what is most important is that there is adaptability in this whole process. So you have got the ability to act quickly, and you've got the ability to alter strategies according to the risk that you see and the risks that emerge. Whilst at the same time, from an analytics standpoint, the more that you can do invisibly, the more sophisticated you can make that step. The more protection you can provide to your cardholders. If you are using a strong method of authentication, as an example, cardholders that see that maybe once a month or once a year, depending on how frequently they shop, that's not going to be a nuisance factor for them. But if they see that on every single transaction, then that's where the friction becomes. So, doing much more invisibly, I think, is the key message, and certainly the analytics that sits behind that is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would agree. As you pointed out, with the TSA pre-check analogy, having all that done before the shopper shows up. And letting them expedite their way through checkout is obviously the thing, and it's a complicated thing to do, but that is the goal. Indeed.
So I'm going to try to wrap up here because I think we are starting to run out of time, and I'm just going to spend just a moment or two self-promoting. But I just want to highlight really that the company that we represent, CA, is right at the heart of what we've been talking about, which is really optimizing the balance between fraud prevention and cardholder experience. And we've been doing that for the last 15 years, and we work with banks around the world to help optimize that process and optimize that journey. And we do that using the types of technologies that we've been referring to in this presentation, but fundamentally it's the balance of the analytics and the strong methods of authentication. And we're pushing the boundaries in both aspects of that to get the best possible results in optimizing that cardholder journey. And fundamentally, what is behind that is a really sophisticated approach to risk analytics. We are doing things in the risk analytics space that haven't been done before in authentication terms, and we're seeing the results of that. And if we can promote that more, and we can get more banks recognizing the opportunity to really optimize that process and take advantage of the data that is flowing through the system to make better decisions, that's really what we're talking about. That's the opportunity that represents itself, and that's something that can be achieved with very little effort, both from a bank side and also our side in providing the type of solutions. I'd also just say that the methods of authentication that we're presenting here are very wide and different methods of authentication, and certainly the mobile as a tool has emerged as a great opportunity for issuers to take advantage of that for identity purposes. Being able to use just the location of the device to be able to identify whether or not a cardholder is genuine is a great example of that. And being able to message the cardholder in real time at the point of purchase with a simple yes/no decision is another example of that. So biometrics, one-time passwords, all of those types of methods of authentication are all things that are tools that issuers can use to really optimize the experience for cardholders. So it's really the issuer's opportunity to take those decisions, and we've been working with issuers for many years to optimize that balance. So with that, Karen, I'll just wrap up then and pass it back to you in case there are any questions. I don't know whether we have any time for questions, but I'd like to thank you for the time today.
No, it's been great. We do have just a minute or two. If there are any remaining questions, please feel free to speak now or forever after. Hold your peace. I think this has been a really interesting conversation because just as you point out the need for education on the consumer side, I do think the ecosystem needs to understand what can be possible with 3D Secure, because I think there is a perception that it is too intrusive to be practical in an environment that is as dynamic as the online environment has become. Would you agree with that, Nick?
Completely. This is this is absolutely about education at a merchant level, education at an issuing level. As we talked about before, the ecosystem is becoming far more complicated than it ever has been. The traditional approaches that issuing banks and merchants have used historically may not be effective in the next few years as the volume of transactions start to jump and as the fraud risk starts to jump online. So that's very much an education problem. Thankfully, this is not a technical issue, right? The technicality of being able to provide solutions to this problem is really not the challenge. It's about education, and it's about being able to recognize what is possible and the opportunities that represent themselves in this cardholder journey.
So a question that's really an interesting question. So I'm just going to paraphrase this. So the doing things behind the scenes to make it easy for consumers, the question isn't that ignoring the kind of access to data that you would need to be thinking about historical data, so transactional data related to that individual, the volumes, things that aren't necessarily possible to know until there is that consumer that shows up and they start doing what it is that they're doing. And then the corollary is, isn't that why in some environments like India, there's this requirement to authenticate every single shopping session because you don't have access to that kind of data? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, and worthwhile just recognizing that when we talk about data and collecting data, we're not looking at that in a one-time sense. We're not looking at that in the sense of a single transaction and disregarding that data as we move forward and look at another isolated transaction. What we're doing is and this is where the analytics and the power of the analytics becomes so important, we're looking for the associations, we're looking for the patterns that relate to cardholder behavior. So if a cardholder has shopped on a regular basis from, Delaware, and suddenly is appearing in Brazil somewhere, or is in London or in Paris or wherever, that has one indication of a different behavior. There are many thousands of different variables that are then being looked at to be able to assess whether or not this genuine transaction is consistent with the previous history. And that's the opportunity, and that's really the sophistication that analytics brings. If you can do that silently, and then use that to build those patterns of behavior to isolate both the genuine cases as well as the fraudulent cases, and using device-based technology, device fingerprinting, to be able to identify the devices themselves and make associations between those devices and the cards that are being used, and the history of those devices and the connection between the device and the card, how many different devices has a card been used on and how many cards has a device been used on. Those types of associations are really where the opportunity is to identify what is then genuine and what is then suspicious.
So one final question, and then we'll let everyone go. This is an interesting one. What about using social identity? Does that play a role in any of the flow?
Yeah, so social identity, I think, is a really interesting and certainly emerging area of data and information, and we are living much more online, and we are leaving a footprint online. There is definitely an opportunity to use that from the standpoint of data and analytics. To identify whether or not a person is who they say they are. That may be appropriate for KYC. That may be appropriate for other methods of identity. What you're trying to prove in e-commerce is whether or not that person, not whether or not that person exists, but whether or not that payment method is being used by the person that is the genuine cardholder. That's really the challenge that you're faced with payment identity, which is maybe slightly different to being able to identify whether or not a person can be provided a bank account or can be loaned money or whatever it might be. So a slightly different type of opportunity, but definitely an opportunity that will emerge as a new way of identifying people.
That's a good point. It's not the person; it's the payment method. On that note, we've asked everyone to stay a couple of extra minutes, and we'll now thank everyone for their time, and especially you, Nick, for giving us such a thoughtful presentation on a strategy and set of tactics and tools that can really help convert some of the $4 trillion we started talking about into real opportunities for merchants and obviously issuers as well. So thanks very much, Nick, for your time, and thanks to everyone who stayed and listened. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Many thanks.